Good day, everyone. This is Sew Giraffe here, coming at you with a new sewing tutorial. Today, we will be making a sea otter plush. Now, this plush pattern comes from Choli Knight or Sew Destiny's website. Link is in the description. I highly recommend you checking out her website yourself and making one for yourself. Now, for this project, I decided to use long pile fur for the body and head, and then shorter pile fur for the arms and legs. I was trying to copy how a sea otter looks in the wild. They typically have a lighter colored face and then a darker stomach and legs. Step one for me for any of my projects is to embroider it. So for embroidery, I typically cut out a piece 1 inch larger than the pattern piece itself, and that way I don't have to worry about centering it properly, and I can use scraps for future projects. So once I have cut out my embroidery fabric square, I will spray the stabilizer with the adhesive. I use the ODIF 505 adhesive spray for fabrics. This is not a paid promotion, but I do really like that one. I get mine at my local fabric store. Then I take the fabric and I attach it to the stabilizer, making sure that it's laid down flat. As you can see, I am running my hands over the fabric to make sure there are no creases or anything that could impact the embroidery itself. Next, I will put top stabilizer on the fabric. Because this is minky and a long pile, it needs to have the stabilizer, so then that way the stitches stay on top of the fabric and give it a cleaner look than if there was no stabilizer and it would sink into the fabric. Next, you're going to hoop everything. I used my magnetic hoop. It is the perfect item for me. However, there are other hoops available, or the hoop that just comes with your machine. You would just snap it in. It really just depends on your preference. Now we are going to get started on the embroidery process itself. Luckily, the machine will pretty much do everything for me. I just have to change out the threads periodically to match the colors I want. Once that is done, I will take the embroidery hoop off of the machine, take the fabric out of the project, remove the back stabilizer and the top stabilizer, and then I will pattern out the piece by matching up the little triangle for the dart, and then I will cut out that piece as well. Next step is to do the shell embroidery. So for that, I will take a scrap of my blue that I had lying around that is large enough to make the shell out of. I will spray the bottom stabilizer, attach the fabric, put the top stabilizer on, and then I will attach it to the hoop. my magnetic hoop. It just seems to be a little bit easier if I do it in that order, but not necessarily a distinct order. Next, I will embroider the little lines for the shell. And this project is an in the hoop embroidery project, so it's actually a little bit challenging. You got to make sure that you hold down the fabric when you are doing in the hoop, because the machine itself is going to sew up everything, and if you don't hold on to the fabric, it could shift, and that could cause your needle to break or your machine to get damaged in some way. Once you're done embroidering the shell, you will trim it and turn it right side out and then set it off to the side. For step 3, you will pattern out the project. That is the process through which you copy the pattern onto the back of the fabric. Then you will cut out your project. Now, Choli Night Soda Stays patterns are very good because they include the seam allowance. In my patterns that I make, I also include the seam allowance, but just make sure you pay attention to the pattern that you're using. And if it doesn't contain a seam allowance, you will have to add that onto the project. So step 4, we're going to finally start sewing. The first part will be sewing the head darts. So there's one in the top center of the head and then one in the bottom center. The best way to do a dart is to turn the fabric in so you're not doing a straight line from the outer to the inner, but rather a curved slope that kind of blends into it. Also, if you mess up and you don't do your dart correctly, or once you're all done and you find out that the dart is giving the little point, you can always fix that with a ladder stitch along dart seam. Luckily, I didn't have that with this one due to the longer pile for fabric, but it's totally fixable if you do. On step 5, we will sew, trim, and turn the ears right side out. We will not be stuffing the ears. Frankly, I think their ears are flat on their head, so I wouldn't necessarily use stuffing for this. Next, we will be basting the ears to the head. Basting is the process through which you sew the two pieces together, but you don't do a back stitch, nor do you do short stitch length. You're actually going to lengthen your stitch length a bit. That way, once you're done basting, you can open it up and see if that is where you want that piece to connect. And if not, then you can take your seam ripper, take it out, and then redo it. Next, on step 7, we will be sewing the head back pieces together. So for this, you're going to sew the top 2 inches of it. You're going to skip 2 inches and then sew the last inch. I usually try to have the opening for turning and stuffing be on the back side of the head down towards the bottom. It just looks a little bit nicer in my opinion, and that way, in case my ladder stitch that closes up the head is not even, then it will be hidden a little bit from the direct top of the head. Once you're sewing the head back to the head front, you will trim it and turn it right side out and then set it off to the side. On step 9, we will sew the arms, trim them, turn them right side out, and lightly stuff them. I used about 2 to 3 pinches of stuffing to stuff up the arms. That way it makes it a little bit fluffier in my opinion. Also, if you stuff it up too far up to the very opening, it could be hard to baste it to your project itself. Next, on step 10, we will sew the feet together, trim them, turn them right side out. On step 11, we're going to top stitch the feet to give them some definition. Top stitching is a process through which once you have turned it right side out, you sew on the top outside of the piece itself, and this provides definition. Please note that we are not stuffing the feet at this time. You can certainly do that if you would like. I just thought they had more flipper foot. On step 12, we will baste the feet to the body. And remember, basting is the process through which we take a longer stitch length and no back stitch, and we attach it to the body. When I was patterning out the pieces, I made sure to copy the marks that were on the pattern. And Sew Destiny is very good about showing you where to put the feet and where to put the arms. Speaking of arms, step 13, you're going to baste the arms to the body. Be very careful about this. Sometimes it is hard, especially if you stuffed up the arm too much near the opening, to make sure you go through all 3 layers when you're basting it. On step 14, we will be sewing the tail to the body. That goes right underneath the feet. So make sure that you have the feet turned up, resting on the stomach itself, and then place the tail piece there. I did trim this section as well once I was done sewing, but I used my scissors and not my pinking shears. Next, step 15, and I always forget this, but amazingly I didn't this time, is you will be attaching the tag. I have sew on tags, but in case you have a sew in the seam tag, you could do that right there as well. I try to keep my tags towards the tail or the back leg. It just seems to be the common way you would do it. Next, on step 16, we're going to sew the back to the stomach, leaving the neck open. Here is important to make sure that you get through the arm pieces. I had a little bit of trouble with this because of this furred fabric. It's a little bit harder to keep from shifting around, and so I had to go back and do it or fix up some holes. So before you trim it, make sure you check and there are no holes. Usually what I do is I flip the project over and I go around where the seam will be and I make sure that everything is connected. Next, you're going to trim the body piece and then turn right side out. On step 17, we will stuff the head and body to your likeness. I did add a little pellet pouch to add some weight to it, but that is totally optional. On step 18, we're going to sew the head seam using a ladder stitch. Usually what I do is I come in from the inside of it and then start at the top of the seam, and then I pull the needle through and I bring it around and I go in between the two threads and I pull it so that way it knots and it catches. I brush the tail down from the sewing thread. If it's too long, I will trim it. And then I start by going in on the right going down. I go into the fabric, I go in past the seam area, and then I come back out again on that same side. And then I go directly across to the left side. And then I go down and come back up. And then you repeat that process all the way till the end. At the very end, you will knot your fabric. And to do that, you will put your needle in the project like you are going to do a ladder stitch. Make sure it's not too far away from the current outing of your thread. And then you will bring it up and through the thread and knot it, and then knot it again. So you're catching the thread on the entrance and on the exit. Once that is done, you have knotted your thread, drive it through the head, coming out not in the exact same location. That way the thread can be buried in there. I usually try to give it a nice little pull. Usually you hear or feel the knot pop through the fabric, and that way I know it's relatively secure. Next, we are going to use a gathering stitch on the neck piece. And a gathering stitch is you take your thread and your needle, and then I usually start at the seam section, and then I'll go around the whole neck opening, just going in and out, not going back in any way, and then I pull it shut. And that way it creates this flat surface that you can sew on. And once I'm done doing the gathering, I will knot the fabric to make sure it stays in place. And then on step 20, you're going to attach the head to the body using the ladder stitch. Some of my best tricks and tips for this is to make sure that you go around a couple of times and you knot periodically, just to make sure that there is a catch in case some thread gets caught or something. When I'm making these projects for kids and the like, I will feel the neck. I will try to feel it and make sure that my fingers can't get into the holes or anything like that. And then I also try to pull the head apart with my hands. Don't think a kid's gonna do that, but at the same time, I don't want them to be super easily destroyed. Next, on step 21, you're going to stuff the shell and then ladder stitch it closed. Make sure you're using a matching thread to your shell. Always use matching thread. Finally, we are going to attach the shell to the arms. So I used a ladder stitch for this as well. And I started on one arm and stitched it to the paw. And then I knotted it, drove the needle through the shell itself, pulled it out the other side, and then ladder stitched it to the other paw. And then I went back and did it again on the other side. That way it's a continuous piece of thread and it should hold up to the shell being played with. Step 23 is the most important step. Pat yourself on the back. You have made something that is so unique. Even if you make it 100 more times, there's not going to be a single one that's going to be that way again. And that is truly the beauty of making something for yourself, for your friends, family, loved ones, whoever. And I hope this video helped you in some way. Maybe it helped you get over that little hump you were having with the difficulties. Definitely check out So Destiny's Choli Knight's website. She has wonderful tutorials, tips, and tricks. I am currently selling my own plushies and plushie kits that you can use to make your own. So in case you want to get started and you're not sure where to get fabric, thread, needles, all that stuff, that is an option. So make sure to check out my Etsy page, link in the description. And as always, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.